Hey guys, tonight we drift across a world where silence is heavier than stone, and markets have not heard a single voice for centuries. You're about to step into the Sahara, not the touristy postcard version, but the old one stitched together. With salt, gold, and secrets that could make even Indiana Jones sweat under that hat. Out here, mirages play tricks on you. The horizon quivers like molten glass, and every ripple in the sand feels like a whisper from a city long gone. Picture yourself trudging through dunes. It's so tall they could swallow a skyscraper whole. The wind hums in your ears like an old air conditioner. On its last leg, and the sun? Oh, it's like someone parked a nuclear spotlight right above your head. You probably wouldn't survive this journey without a camel, and even then you'd be wondering which is more stubborn, the desert or the camel. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a caravan trail. It's not obvious at first. It looks like the same old desert. But if you squint, you catch faint lines in the sand, as if some giant finger scratched the earth centuries ago. These were the lifelines of trade, the arteries of entire civilizations. Before engines, before GPS, humans mapped the desert with stars, bones, and stubborn hope. Historians still argue whether early routes were discovered by accident or planned, like cosmic blueprints, but either way, they worked. For centuries, camel trains snaked across here like living conveyor belts, hauling salt, ivory, and the kind of gossip that makes history books blush. You take a slow breath. The air tastes like dust and something metallic, maybe iron fragments underfoot. Or maybe it's just your imagination running wild. Ahead, the first caravan crests a dune. Camels in silhouette like cutouts from an old adventure novel, each hump swaying in rhythm to bells that jingle faintly against the wind. These bells weren't just pretty accessories. They kept the animals moving and warned predators. Though honestly, any predator out here deserves a medal for persistence. The merchants riding atop wear turbans so bright they almost glow against the beige infinity. Deep indigo wraps stain their skin, a mark of pride among Tuareg traders who dominated these sands. You picture them checking leather water skins, murmuring prayers, maybe even humming desert songs that sound like lullabies stretched thin across the wind. Funny thing, those melodies still exist, carried in oral traditions like Spotify playlists. Powered by memory instead of Wi-Fi. A thought slips in. How did they do this, day after day, without Netflix or air conditioning? Well, they had stars. The sky was their Google Maps, and you, looking up now, can almost hear constellations clicking into place like ancient coordinates. Historians still debate whether routes changed dramatically after climate shifts or political collapses, but they agree on one thing: without these early navigators, Africa's trade network would have been a fraction of what it became. You walk closer to the caravan, dust crunching softly under your sandals. One merchant tosses you a grunt friendly, like he's seen enough mirages to know you're probably not real. His cargo? Slabs of salt strapped like silver bricks, sacks of cola nuts, maybe a hint of gold dust shimmering in the folds of cloth. Here's your quirky fact for the night. In some parts of medieval West Africa, salt was literally worth its weight in gold. Imagine paying for coffee with a giant salt bar. Actually, given modern cafe prices, that's not far off. A camel snorts. Behind him, rolling its eyes in that "I hate Mondays" way camels have perfected since the Bronze Age, you can almost hear its inner monologue. Great. Another 400 miles of sand and existential dread. As the bells fade, you glance back at the empty horizon. What feels eternal now was once busy, loud, almost chaotic, markets buzzing. Poets reciting under clay arches, children chasing goats between stalls. Cities bloomed and withered out here like mirages given flesh, then dust, and tonight you'll walk through their ghostly remains, piecing together fragments under starlight. The sun dips low, bleeding orange across dunes that glow like molten copper. Shadows stretch long, like fingers pointing toward something you can't yet see, a promise of ruins hidden in folds of sand, waiting, patient as time itself. You take another step, and the desert exhales a breath so quiet it sounds like a lullaby. You keep walking, letting the hush of the evening settle over your shoulders like a faded wool cloak. The air is cooler now, though that's like saying lava feels nicer at sunset. It's still the Sahara. Breath tastes faintly of grit and dry stone, and somewhere in the distance, the camel bells have gone silent. All that remains is the wind, rolling across the dunes like a tired storyteller who refuses to quit. Your feet trace faint indentations where thousands before you pressed their hopes into the sand. These were the desert highways, etched not in asphalt, but in memory. Merchants, pilgrims, and wanderers followed these same lines, convinced that beyond the next dune waited salvation, or at least a decent cup of spiced tea. You pause for a moment and tilt your head back. Above you the sky blooms with stars so sharp they could slice your retinas. This was the GPS of the ancient world. Those flickering dots held secrets more valuable than any compass. Historians still argue whether navigation was purely stellar or combined with the whispered lore of wind patterns and migrating dunes. Either way, it worked well enough to keep caravans alive, which in this neighborhood is a big win. The route. Under your feet once connected empires. Think of Ghana's bustling power in the first millennium. Later Mali and Songhai, names that now sound like chapters in a forgotten epic, but were once centers of learning and wealth. Salt from Taudini, gold from the Niger Bend, and manuscripts that smelled faintly of ink and goatskin, they all floated along these sand arteries. The Sahara wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge, fragile but vital, and those who crossed it became the nervous system of Africa's economy. Your quirky tidbit for the night? Travelers often buried caches of water in clay jars along the route. A primitive version of save game. Imagine trekking 200 miles and finding your desert equivalent of a vending machine because past you had the foresight to stash some liquid life. The downside? Sometimes those jars cracked or shifting dunes gobbled them whole. Talk about a spoiler as you move. You notice the sand isn't uniform, it ripples in long waves, striped in pale gold and bruised rose under the dying light. Every ridge hides a story. Maybe beneath that hump lies a shard of Garamantian pottery, or a bronze coin smudged with time. Archaeologists dream of such finds hunched in trenches while the wind teases their hats into new zip codes. They've traced these caravan lines using satellite imaging now, lines invisible to the naked eye, yet sharp as veins under the desert skin. You step over what looks like a half-buried stone, maybe a marker, maybe just geology playing tricks. Traders sometimes planted piles of rocks to guide the next souls through this sandy purgatory. A primitive GPS waypoint, except instead of recalculating, you'd just die of thirst if you missed it. Comforting, right? Further along, you picture the chaos these routes once carried. Strings of camels loaded like floating wardrobes. Drivers wrapped in veils dyed with indigo so rich it stained their skin. The Tuareg became legends, not just for their navigation, but for their endurance, their songs echoing over dunes like half-remembered prayers. You catch a scrap of one now soft, mournful, maybe imaginary, but it fits the rhythm of your steps. And here's the open question scholars still bicker over. Did these trails emerge because of booming trade? Or did trade boom because someone first dared to carve a path through this furnace? Cause, effect, it's the classic chicken or egg debate, but with more camels and less omelet. As darkness spreads, a flicker appears on the horizon. Orange faint, then stronger. Fire. You imagine an ancient camp? Tents pitched low against the wind, tea bubbling in a dented brass pot, smoke curling up like a slow sigh. Spiced with mint, sweetened with enough sugar to power a toddler for a weak desert tea, wasn't a beverage. It was an energy contract. And yes, tea was often drunk in elaborate rituals that made even British afternoon tea look like a rushed coffee break. You crouch, scoop a handful of sand and let it slip through your fingers. Each grain older than your great-grandmother's. Oldest joke, part of a world that swallowed cities whole and kept their secrets like a miser. You can almost hear the laughter of those caravans, the clink of copper bowls, the shuffle of leather sandals. Then the wind steals the sound, scattering it across miles of silence. The night deepens. Stars glare like paparazzi, and you feel smaller than a flea on a camel's eyebrow. Yet walking here, you're part of something vast, a ghost. Among ghosts tracing footsteps into eternity. Ahead, the fire dims. And beyond it waits the first of the lost cities, a promise whispered by dunes shifting like restless sleepers. The air turns cooler as the horizon surrenders to indigo, and the stars sharpen their gaze. You move slowly now, the sand crunching underfoot like fine sugar. And there it is, your first real glimpse of something man-made rising from this ocean. Of dunes, blocks of stone, rough but deliberate, peek from the drifts like the ribs of some ancient beast. You've arrived at Garamore, what's left of it. Garama wasn't just a dot on the map. It was the heart of the Garamantian kingdom, a society that somehow thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Imagine this. Between 500 BCE and 400 CE, while Rome was busy perfecting the art of road building, the Garamantes were digging underground channels called foggara to tap hidden aquifers. Historians still argue whether these ingenious tunnels were borrowed from Persian designs or a local brainwave. Either way, they turned sand into farmland. Yes, actual green things in this beige infinity. You feel a weird twinge of respect for people who looked at this desert and thought, what would work here? Wheat, you kneel, brushing sand off a chunk of sun-warmed stone. It's cool underneath, like the skin of a buried memory. These walls once held markets buzzing with traders hawking dates, salt, and maybe a few exotic pets, because apparently humans have always thought it's a great idea to gift someone a live leopard. Quirky tidbit? Archaeologists have found horse skeletons here, but not just any horses, chariot ponies. That's right, the Garamantes fielded chariots in desert warfare. Nothing says fashionably late to the Bronze Age like rolling into battle on a two-wheeled death cart in 120-degree heat. You wander deeper, stepping over low mounds that were once gardens. Close your eyes, and you can almost smell green olive. Trees trembling in dry wind, figs swelling under a sun that wanted them dead but failed. Somewhere, a woman in a linen wrap hums while grinding millet, a sound as steady as a heartbeat. Markets hum too, leather sandals slapping, merchants arguing. In voices like cracked bells, coins clinking into clay jars, you catch fragments of conversation imaginary, but rooted in truth. How much for that salt slab? 3 measures of grain and throw in your cousin's donkey. Make it 2 measures and a promise you'll never sing in public again. Dessert swallows the laughter. But you swear you feel it lingering like smoke. Here's your scholarly debate for the night. Why did Garama fall? Some say it was climate change, the slow strangling of those hidden water tables. Others blame shifting trade routes, as camel caravans diverted toward shinier cities. A few argue it was political collapse, a kingdom that stretched too thin and cracked like pottery in the kill. Historians still sift clues like gamblers sifting dice, hoping for a story that fits. You walk past what might have been a palace, maybe just a wealthy merchant's daydream turned to dust. The walls lean drunkenly, draped in shadows. A crescent moon slides above, spilling silver over everything, and for a second, you imagine Garama at night 2,000 years ago, torches flaring, strings of pearls glinting on dancers, drums murmuring. Like distant thunder, city breathing under a sky swollen with stars. Then the image fades, and all you hear is the wind. It hisses through the broken arches like a tired librarian, shushing a world that once dared to speak too loudly. You crouch, pick up a shard of pottery, feel its edge bite your palm ever so gently. Once, this held oil or honey. Now it holds silence, a silence so dense you could almost spread it on bread. The ground trembles, not really. It's just your imagination. But you can't shake the thought that beneath your feet lies a labyrinth of those foggara tunnels. Dark, bone-dry arteries where ghosts might wander, whispering complaints about sand in their sandals. Your feet itch to move on, but your mind lingers. Garama isn't gone. It clings, stubborn as the smell of spiced tea in a wool tent. And as you turn toward the next horizon, you carry a piece of it with you, not the shard, but the echo. The weight of human persistence baked into stone and story. Ahead, the desert yawns again, vast, inscrutable, waiting. The next city whispers your name, its voice thin as wind but steady as time. You pull your robe tighter, take one last look at Garama's bones, and step into the night where the stars hang like lamps above an endless road. The sand under your feet softens as you drift onward, and the wind, for a moment, feels like a long exhale against your skin. Somewhere far ahead, a new silhouette is forming, a low, irregular line breaking the monotony of dunes. It's not Garama anymore. This one is softer around the edges, worn down by centuries. But even from here, you can sense its quiet authority. Timbuktu, rather the ghost of what would become Timbuktu, before the postcards and the cliches. Step closer and feel the shift. The ground hardens, sprinkled with fragments of sun-baked mud brick. This was no sprawling metropolis. It was a cluster of ideas disguised as a town, a marketplace, a resting point, and, in time, a beating heart for scholars. Tonight, though, you're catching it in its early phase. When caravans brought not just salt and gold, but news from worlds you'd never imagine existing out here in the sand's embrace. Picture it. A camel train lumbers in under a sun that hasn't blinked all day. Bells tinkle, voices rise, and the air thickens with smells you can almost taste, smoke from dung fires. Sweat seasoned with desert dust, and maybe the faint sweetness of dates. The market is alive. Merchants squat behind reed mats piled with treasures, shimmering salt slabs, nuggets of gold peeking from leather pouches, spices that prickle your nose with distant promises, and manuscript stacks of them, bound in skins, inked in black and red, carrying thoughts as weighty as the gold they rival in value. Your quirky tidbit for tonight? Some traders valued books so much they'd exchange entire caravans of goods for a single prized manuscript. Imagine walking into a modern bookstore and saying, "Sure, I'll trade you my house for that rare first edition." It's not quite Amazon. Prime, but definitely commitment. As you wander, let your fingers trace the walls. Mud brick ribs rise in soft curves, patched and repatched like a well-loved quilt. They whisper resilience, like a city that knew the desert wasn't an enemy but a dance partner, and inside these walls. Cool shadows where deals unfolded in voices that slid like silk, agreements sealed with a clasp of calloused hands and maybe a murmured blessing. Historians still argue about Timbuktu's origins. Was it a seasonal camp that accidentally turned into a legend? Or was it born grand, destined to lure gold like moths to a flame? No one agrees. What they do agree on is that by the time it hit its stride, Timbuktu wasn't just a market. It was a brain trust. That's later. For now, it's a rugged outpost, with ambitions sprouting like green shoots from a crack in stone. The desert night thickens around you, velvet and immense. The market's soundscape haggling, braying camels, laughter like warm gravel lingers. In your ears, even though all that remains now is silence and a scatter of sand-soft ruins, you imagine lanterns swinging on ropes, their flames jittering like nervous dancers. Somewhere a poet recites verses to an audience too tired to clap but too enchanted to leave. Words float on the air like fireflies, tiny, glowing things trying to survive in a sky swollen with stars. You catch another detail. Half buried near your foot, a spindle of carved wood, maybe once a loom tool, maybe something else entirely. It smells faintly of cedar when you lift it, though maybe that's just your brain inventing ghosts of sense. The people here wove textiles that crossed continents, indigo cloth that bled color into legends. Wrap yourself in that thought. Cloth moving like liquid night. Traded for salt that could outshine silver in value. And here's a thought you can't shake. These silent ruins once buzzed like a hive. Voices layered like woven threads, aerobic, Songhai Berber. Maybe even snatches of languages from far coasts where waves slapped ships instead of dunes. Each word a grain in the hourglass, and now the glass is empty, tipped on its side, waiting. You move on, skirting what was once a gate. Its arch stoops low, weary but proud. like an old storyteller who refuses to lie down. Beyond it, the desert stretches pale and endless, yet full of secrets. Another city calls. You can feel it pulsing through the sand like a heartbeat under. Stone. So you tighten your robe, breathe in the cool night, and follow the trail of stars toward the next whisper of walls. The silence deepens as you leave Timbuktu's memory behind. It isn't empty silence, no. It's the kind that hums. It's the kind you can feel pressing against your ears like a soft, invisible tide. Ahead, the dunes roll lazily, pale silver under. The moon, and then there, in the trough of a hollow lies, a space where the wind hesitates. A market square, or what's left of one. You descend slowly, sand trickling around your ankles. The ground flattens, hard-packed from centuries of feet, hooves, and hope. Once this was a living throat of trade, pulsing with shouts, laughter, bargaining that climbed like smoke into a bright, pitiless sky. Today it's just wind and a faint smell of stone dust, yet if you squint, the ghosts assemble, rows of red mats, baskets of millet, pyramids of salt slabs glowing white as teeth. Picture it for a moment, because tonight's journey is about what your mind can hold, even when your hands can't. You walk among invisible stalls. Hear the sizzle of oil in clay pots, smell lamb stewing with handfuls of desert herbs. A merchant calls out, "Fresh dates, sweeter than your mother's lullaby." And someone answers with a joke about his prices. Children weave through the crowd like smoke, chasing shadows that vanish in the heat haze. Quirky tidbit for the night. Some traders didn't just sell goods, they rented gossip like an actual commodity. That's right, in some markets you could pay for news of distant kingdoms, the rise and fall of sultans, or whether that caravan from the north really was ambushed by spirits or just bad math. Imagine Twitter, but slower, sandier, and with better tea. You crouch, brushing the surface. Your fingers graze a hollow depression, a footprint fossilized in earth like a parenthesis. Maybe a merchant left it behind in the final rush when this place fell silent for good. Historians still argue why these markets died. Was it drought? War? Slow betrayal of shifting routes pulling caravans toward new hubs? Or was it something quieter, people simply deciding the desert had demanded enough blood and bone for one lifetime? No one knows. The wind doesn't answer, though it hisses through cracks in the old clay. Like a librarian telling you to keep your voice down, you move toward what would have been the shade line. Back then, sellers built arcades out of mud brick, thin canopies, stretched tight over poles. Imagine ducking beneath one, your skin singing from the heat, only to feel cool shadows slip over you like silk. Inside, merchants sit cross-legged, coins clinking, jokes whispered behind henna-stained fingers.
Ow.
There's a rhythm to it as old as the dunes a give, a take a shrug.
Yeah, Gren.
The moon hangs now where the sun once ruled, painting everything. Bone pale. The market is empty, but not dead. The silence is too thick, too intentional. As if the stones themselves remember the sound of clamor and are holding it in their pores like a secret. You pick up a fragment, smooth, curved, maybe from a water jug, and it hums faintly in your palm. Or maybe that's just your pulse, sinking to echoes. And because your brain likes to wander, you picture the little scandals that must have unfolded here. A love letter tucked into a spice sack. A stolen glance across a row of dates. Maybe a dance under lantern light when the crowd had thinned. These squares weren't just about trade, they were theaters, gossip hubs, stages where entire lives were negotiated in coin, cloth, and soft conspiratorial laughter. Another gust blows, erasing what few tracks you've left. Soon even you will vanish from this story, at least on the surface. But under the sand, the market sleeps like a cat, quiet, curled. Dreaming of the day it might wake, you rise. Dust falling like old confetti from your robe, and glance toward the eastern horizon. There's a shimmer there, a long sigh of silver where moonlight strokes. The dunes. Another ruin calls, a skeleton of walls, a whisper of domes. You turn your back on the market square, though not without a final glance, and follow that shimmer into the cool velvet night. You walk on until the night folds itself into the dunes like black silk stitched with stars. And then, As if the desert feels sorry for being such a relentless furnace by day, it offers you a gift, an oasis. It appears slowly, like a mirage flexing. Its muscles first, a dark smear against the sand. Then a shimmer that refuses to vanish. And finally, a pool of water glinting under the moon like a shard of broken mirror. You pause on the crest of a dune, staring down at this miracle of geography. A ring of date palms stands like guardians, their fronds whispering secrets to the breeze. The air here is softer, sweeter, tinged with the faint perfume of green life, a smell so gentle. It feels like the desert's apology letter for everything else it puts you through. Step closer. The sand cools underfoot, shading into firm soil, mottled with roots. Your hand brushes a palm trunk, rough as an old sailor's beard. You feel its silent pulse, hauling water up from veins buried deep under the sand. Historians still argue whether these oases formed naturally along hidden aquifers or were coaxed into existence by human engineering. Either way, they became the Sahara's beating heart stations of hope, without which no caravan would dare gamble its luck. And the sounds here are almost intimate after the desert's roar. A soft ripple as wind skims the water, the lazy squeak of a palm frond pivoting on its stalk, the distant clink of camel bells if you listen hard enough. Even the air hums differently, carrying a promise that makes you want to curl up and nap under those green umbrellas. But don't less you're fine sharing your dreams with scorpions. Here's your quirky tidbit. In medieval times, some oases were so prosperous they developed their own microcultures, complete with poetry contests. Imagine lounging by the water, composing verses about palm trees while someone roasts goat nearby. Beats writing emails under fluorescent lights, doesn't it? You squat by the water, cupping your hands for a drink. It tastes of minerals and something ancient like a memory you can't quite place. The pool mirrors the moon, and for a breathless second, it feels like you're holding the night in your palms. Cool droplets trickle down your wrists, making tiny rivers that vanish into your skin. Look around and picture the scene centuries ago. Tents pitched in neat arcs, their guy ropes taut as harpstrings. Merchants sprawled on rugs, sipping tea brewed so strong it could wrestle your eyelids shut or fling them wide open. Someone plucks a lute, notes tumbling like pebbles across a polished floor. Children chase goats, laughter skipping like sparks. And in the distance, the desert keeps its poker face, pretending it's not impressed. This is where deals happened, the salt-to-gold ratios hammered out under starlight. Alliances sealed over bowls of steaming couscous. And yes, there were squabbles. One account mentions a caravan master refusing to share shade with his rival, claiming the palm tree didn't like him. Historians still laugh at that, one or argue whether it was a metaphor for politics. Either way, the tree's opinion remains unrecorded. You recline on a low mound, letting your fingers comb the grass, a rare luxury out here. The breeze smells faintly of dates ripening overhead. You reach for one, pluck it, and feel its skin, taut and glossy, hiding flesh as sweet as a bribe. Bite gently, and it floods your mouth with syrupy warmth, grounding you in a moment so tender you almost forget how lethal this land can be. Above, stars lean closer, thick as spilled sugar, and you wonder how many eyes have traced these constellations. From this very spot, pilgrims, traders, dreamers, all staring up, hoping for signs, answers, maybe just a little reassurance that the desert wasn't planning to eat them alive. The night stretches. Shadows nestle under the palms like folded animals, and the pool shivers under a stray gust, scattering the moon into silver coins. You rise slowly, brushing sand from your robe, the taste of dates lingering on your tongue like a secret you're not ready to share. Ahead, the dunes wait, patient and pale, guarding stories you've yet to hear. You take one last look at the oasis, its stillness, its fragile defiance, and then you turn, stepping back into the emptiness, where only your footprints and the wind keep you company. For now, the oasis fades behind you like a dream you half remember after waking. The sand creeps back into every crevice of the night, its silver ripples shifting with a sigh that sounds suspiciously like laughter. The desert is playing its tricks again. Out here, reality has loose edges, and stories slip through the seams like wind through a cracked door. You trudge on, the stars wheeling overhead in their silent choreography. Then, faint at first, you hear it bells, soft, irregular, like someone shaking a handful of coins in a velvet bag. Another caravan. And sure enough, the shapes appear on the next rise. Tall, loping silhouettes, their humps swaying like lazy marrow. The merchants riding atop, draped in indigo so deep it swallows the moonlight, their faces masked, eyes gleaming from folds of cloth. These are the Tuareg, lords of the sands, wrapped head to toe in veils that make them look like shadows. Given legs, the color is more than fashion, its status. But here's your quirky tidbit. That indigo dye wasn't exactly user-friendly. Stained their skin blue, so much that outsiders called them the blue men of the Sahara. Imagine explaining that in a medieval skincare blog. Step 1. Dye yourself permanently azure. Step 2. Own it. As the caravan draws closer, you catch their voices low, musical, carrying like warm smoke on the wind. They're not just talking business. They're telling stories, because in the desert, silence is heavy, and words lighten the load. One trader swears he saw a lake shimmering beyond the dunes, guarded by a spirit who demands riddles at the shore. Another counters with a tale of a city made of glass, its towers glinting like icicles under the sun. Historians still argue whether these myths were born from mirages or loneliness, or maybe both. You imagine sitting cross-legged by their fire later, tea bubbling in a soot-streaked kettle, steam curling up like desert handwriting. They'd pour it from dizzying heights, a golden thread of liquid arcing into tiny glasses because apparently gravity was invented just for theatrics. You'd sip, scorch your tongue, and nod solemnly while they debate whether the dunes themselves move because of the wind or because they're alive and bored. No one wins that argument, but everyone laughs, and the sound drifts into the dark like sparks that never burn out. Here's another fun fact. Wrapped in scholarly bickering, were these merchants just practical businessmen, or were they part-time philosophers? Some accounts suggest they swapped proverbs as eagerly as salt slabs. A few early manuscripts record desert aphorisms like, "The sand will outlast your footprints," which is deep literally and figuratively. The caravan passes. Bells chiming like sleepy wind chimes, and you keep walking, the stories they left behind still curling in your ears. You picture their camels, those ships of the desert, plodding on with that eternal, grumpy stare, as if plotting revenge on humanity for inventing baggage. One beast pauses to sneeze violently into the night, a sound so startling you almost laugh aloud. Who knew existential dread could come with so much mucus? The wind freshens, tugging at your robe, and with it comes a flicker of doubt. Was that really a caravan? Or did the desert spin another mirage out of moonlight and wishful thinking? The tracks behind you are already gone, swallowed in seconds. If you told someone this story later, they might nod politely, the way people do when they don't believe you, but don't want to hurt your feelings. Ahead, a darker shadow looms against the sand's pale glow, a ridge, or maybe the skeleton of another city. Can almost feel it breathing, patient as stone. Its name hangs just out of reach like a word on the tip of your tongue. But before you get there, the desert will throw more illusions at you. Glimmers of green that vanish when you blink. Pools that turn into dry basins, voices curling out of nowhere. And maybe that's the point. The Sahara is a master storyteller. And tonight, it's letting you read the footnotes in sand and starlight. So you walk on, listening to whispers you can't quite decipher, wondering if they belong to ghosts, to wind, or to your own restless brain. The ridge ahead sharpens into something less natural as you approach. Straight lines start cutting through the soft chaos of the dune's geometry, where there should only be wind's handwriting. You crest the last rise, breath snagging in your throat, and there it is, faint under the moon, half swallowed by sand, but undeniably real. A ruined gate, its arch carved with patterns worn down to whispers, flanked by columns that lean like drunks after a long feast. This Once upon a trade route was a checkpoint, maybe even the proud entry to a market square that throbbed with life. You can almost hear it if you close your eyes. Iron hammers ringing on brass scales, camels grumbling in chorus, voices braided together in a dozen languages. Salt for gold, gold for cloth, cloth for stories, every transaction another. Stitch in the great fabric of the Sahara's economy. Now, just silence thick enough to taste, you crouch, brushing away a layer of sand, and find something absurdly ordinary, a clay shard, the rim of what was probably a water jug. Imagine some medieval merchant haggling hard for a dozen amphorae only. To have his great-great-grandchildren argue over whether he existed at all, historians still argue whether these markets were seasonal pop-ups or permanent installations. Were they bustling year-round, or did they bloom like desert flowers after rare rains, then vanish again? The evidence, as usual, is buried under a few metric tons of sand and scholarly pride. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some archaeologists claim these towns had silent zones, spaces where negotiations happened without a word. Picture two traders squatting in the sun, glaring at each other over a heap of salt slabs and nuggets of gold. No talking, no shouting, just hand gestures, eyebrow gymnastics, and a lot of dramatic sighing. Apparently, the desert invented passive-aggressive, haggling centuries before anyone thought of texting K. You wander deeper, through doorways where shadows nest like sleepy birds. There's the ghost of a market stall, a rectangle of stones that probably framed a counter where spices once sat in perfumed pyramids. Maybe there was a kid here, smacking dates into neat stacks, while sneaking as many as possible into his mouth. Now, the only scent is dust, dry as old parchment. And yet your senses start betraying you. A whiff of something sweet brushes past. Cinnamon? Or maybe the warm musk of cardamom. It lingers long enough to make you doubt everything you know about how noses work. The desert does this, slips memory into your lungs until you're not sure if you're inhaling air or someone else's nostalgia. Pause and listen. No bells now, no voices, just wind, teasing broken walls into a low, hollow song. It almost sounds like the hum of distant commerce, stretched thin across centuries. You lean against a cracked pillar, and for a second you feel the grit of painted plaster under your fingers, though the color's long gone. Was it blue? Red? Historians still debate the aesthetics of Saharan architecture, and honestly, it's kind of comforting that even experts argue over ancient paint chips. The moon slides higher, silvering the edges of everything. The ruin glows faintly like bone. Under skin, and your brain, ever the opportunist, supplies more ghosts. A woman with henned hands, bargaining over perfume. A scribe hunched in a corner, ink staining his sleeve, tallying numbers with monk-like precision. A storyteller because every market had one spinning tales of cities even more fabulous than this one. Maybe he even whispered about a place where the streets glittered with salt, so fine you could mistake it for frost. You wander into what might have been a storage yard. The floor is uneven, and your sandal kicks something metallic. You stoop, dig, and there in your palm a copper coin, green with age, its markings eroded into abstraction. Worthless now except as proof that once money clinked here, promises were made. And people worried about exchange rates long before anyone invented Bitcoin. You pocket the coin. Not because you need it. What would you even buy out here? Because it anchors you to this illusion of permanence in a land built on impermanence. The sand presses close again, sighing, ready to erase your footprints and your find as soon as your back is turned, and so you move on. Past the ghost of the gate, back into the ripple-patterned infinity. The ruin shrinks behind you, dissolving. Like a mirage into the language it came from. Silence. Ahead something glimmers, a promise or a lie. The desert doesn't care which. The shimmer you spotted turns out to be nothing more than heat's mischief. A trick of light-bending air, teasing you like a cat with a laser pointer. You squint anyway, because maybe, just maybe, this time the mirage is telling the truth. Out here. Faith in illusions is practically a survival skill. Your stomach rumbles as the sun dips and the wind sharpens its edge, hissing through the grains. You pull your robe tighter, And imagine what these caravans carried when this place was. The medieval equivalent of Wall Street. Gold? Yes, but also something far humbler, and yet somehow equally prized. Salt. Blocks of it stacked like bricks, each one heavy enough to make you reconsider life choices after half a mile of hauling. They weren't just seasoning your fries, salt was currency, literally. A merchant could walk into a market, slap down a slab, and walk out with a camel or two. Picture this. You're trudging alongside a camel train. The air tastes like chalk. The horizon, a blade of white fire. Ahead, men in indigo robes shuffle under the burden of salt bars, balanced on shoulders that probably hate their life choices. And you're realizing that if a modern influencer had to carry their paycheck on their back in crystal form, Instagram would look very different. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some historians claim the phrase "worth his salt" dates back to this era, when salt literally meant survival. Lose your cargo and you weren't just broke, you were seasoning free, which, let's be honest, is worse. Can you even imagine a life without salty snacks? Exactly. Now you understand why men risked everything for this pale treasure. You stoop and drag your fingers through a ripple of sand, imagining the glitter beneath. Gold dust? Maybe? Ivory chips? Or the sweat of thousands who carve these roads without ever leaving a signature? Historians still argue whether salt was the true backbone of Saharan trade or whether it shared the stage with gold and grain. Some even insist that salt eclipsed everything else, which, if true, means those fancy gold nuggets everyone drools over were basically just side hustles in the grand sodium economy. As twilight folds the sky into violet silk, you imagine a marketplace from centuries ago. Open stalls, camels kneeling, like ships at dock, slabs of salt glinting like frozen sunlight. A kid darts past, balancing a chunk of it on his head like a crown. Another merchant waves his arms in exasperation because his customer insists on tasting the salt before buying. What's he expecting that it's chocolate? Humans have always been weird. The wind shifts, carrying the faintest echo of bells. You glance back. Nothing but dunes curling into shadow. Still for a second, you swear you see them. Lean men. In flowing robes, their camels groaning under crystalline burdens, heading for an oasis that might not exist anymore. You almost wave, then feel ridiculous. But hey, the desert likes to keep your ego hydrated with occasional hallucinations. Your path cuts across something hard. You scrape away sand and reveal a wooden beam, brittle as toast. A fragment of an old salt sled, maybe dragged by men when the camel option ran out. Imagine that life, pulling half a ton of salt across an ocean of heat while praying your sandals don't disintegrate. You think your gym sessions are tough? Please. And here's another delightfully odd note. Salt wasn't just for eating. People rubbed it into wounds, preserved meat with it, and get this, used it in magic. Desert folk believed a circle of salt could block spirits from messing with your night. So picture a caravan camp after sunset, ringed with glowing fires and a powdery halo of salt like some medieval no-ghost zone. Paranormal protection and snacks in one handy package. Night leans closer now, laying cool fingers on your shoulders. The stars bloom, fierce and clear, like diamonds flung across black silk. You sit down, the sand sighing under you, and for a heartbeat you feel the same smallness as those ancient traders. They cross this void for wealth. You could lose to one bad sandstorm. You cross it for whispers and dreams, for stories that crumble slower than walls. Maybe that's its own kind of profit. You let your fingers sift the sand until they sting. With cold, a grain sticks to your palm, glittering like a tiny moon, worth less than salt, but somehow priceless. You blow it away, and the desert, smug as ever, swallows the gesture whole. You rise, brushing the cool grit from your palms, and walk toward the faint outline of a crumbling wall half sunk in sand. At first it seems like nothing, just a random bump in the vast tan monotony. But as you draw closer, you realize what you're looking at: a fragment of a city's memory, stubbornly refusing to vanish. Its mud brick skin has peeled away, but there's a dignity in its bones. It's like an old scholar who has forgotten everything except how to stand. This, you tell yourself, could have been the threshold of a library. Suddenly, you're not in a wasteland anymore. You're stepping into a room where ink once ruled. Imagine shelves of manuscripts stacked like treasure chests, their pages breathing words into the dry air. The smell would have been something between leather and lamp oil, spiced with dust and time. These weren't casual books. They were guardians of law, theology, medicine, ideas, stitched together long before. Netflix taught you to binge. Historians still argue whether these libraries were the intellectual epicenter of the medieval world or just cozy study nooks for elite families. Some scholars go all in, claiming that in towns like Timbuktu and Chinguetti, knowledge was the currency that outshone even gold. Others roll their eyes and point out that most of these manuscripts never left their owners' trunks. But let's be honest, whether they were widely read or not, they existed, Dan, that's enough to give your brain a pleasant hum right now. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Manuscripts in this part of the world weren't just written, they were sung. Yes, scholars often memorized texts by turning them into rhythmic recitations, almost like proto-podcasts. You picture a student hunched under a flickering oil lamp, murmuring lines in a steady cadence, his voice syncing with the chirp of desert. Crickets. If you listen hard enough, maybe the wind still carries a scrap of that melody across the dunes. You stoop to imagine one of those manuscripts in your hands. The pages are a delicate ochre, ink swirling like frozen smoke. Margins bloom, with tiny notes, scribbled centuries ago by someone whose pulse you'll never know. Maybe it's a commentary on trade law. Or maybe because humans can't resist the doodle of a camel with comically long legs. The past isn't all solemnity, likes its inside jokes too. You linger on this thought as the night deepens, thick and velvety. The stars above seem almost nosy now, leaning closer, as if curious about what you're reading in your head. And why not? For a brief second, you feel like one of those scholars hunched in a world of sand, letting ideas bloom where crops cannot. There's something rebellious about that. Building an empire of thought when the earth refuses to feed you. A sudden gust scatters sand through the gap in the wall, brushing your face like dry silk. It makes you think about the fragility of it, all these words that outlasted swords, yet now tremble at the whim of a breeze. There are whole debates about how many manuscripts were lost to termites, water, and sheer neglect. But then, like a bad twist in a drama, colonial collectors swooped in and carried others far away. Imagine your family photo album ending up in someone else's attic. Same energy still. Thousands survived hidden in trunks, under beds, in dusty cupboards that doubled as time machines. Even today, some families guard these books like gold, wrapped in faded cloth and passed down like whispers. There's a tenderness in that, don't you think? As if memory itself has a pulse, faint but insistent. You tilt your head and look out through what might have been a window. The desert hums in the distance, a bass note under the starlight's shimmer. You wonder if the scholars who once sat here ever dreamed their world would fall silent, their debates collapsing into sand. Or maybe they knew. Maybe that's why they wrote in the first place. To leave something louder than footsteps. Your gaze drops to the sand piling in a corner. And for half a second you imagine it twitching like it wants to tell you a secret. You lean in. Nothing. Just the desert being smug again? Still you whisper a thank you under your breath for the walls, for the ghosts, for the stubborn ink. And maybe, just maybe, for the way the wind almost sounds like someone softly turning a page. You move on, your feet sinking softly into powdery drifts that swallow sound. Ahead, the sand swells into low ridges, and between them, you catch hints of geometry lines and angles that nature doesn't bother to draw. Walls are what's left. Of them, another city erased but not completely. Its bones lie slack across the desert floor. It's like an animal that curled up for one last sleep and forgot to wake. You pause and look around. There's no one here, just the lazy hiss of wind and a few stubborn thorn bushes, clinging to life like unpaid interns. Still, you can feel the weight of 1,000 ghosts pressing gently against your shoulders. This was once a kingdom, maybe. A bustling one, with courtyards echoing laughter and gossip about camel prices. It's hard to picture now, but if you close your eyes you can almost hear it. The slap of sandals. The rhythmic chant of traders haggling for salt blocks and ivory tusks. The creak of wooden doors swelling in the heat. Historians still argue whether these vanished cities died of thirst. greed, or sheer bad luck. Some point to climate shifts, those long droughts that sneer at human ambition. Others blame shifting trade routes because when the money takes a new road, cities shrivel like forgotten fruit. And then there's the romantic theory that some were swallowed whole by wandering dunes, like bedtime monsters hiding under the world's biggest blanket. Here's your quirky fact for the night. A few explorers in the 19th century thought they'd found Atlantis in the Sahara. Yes, the Atlantis. They saw concentric ruins, probably natural formations, and went, boom, mystery solved. Turns out they were wrong, but admit it for a second. Your brain just pictured Plato sipping tea in the desert. You step deeper, into the ruins where sandbanks lean like lazy cats against what used to be walls. You trail your fingers over the bricks, their surface crumbling at the lightest touch. We're built from mud and straw mixed with sweat and optimism, baked under a sun that doesn't forgive mistakes. How long did they last? A few centuries? Maybe more. Now they return to dust, as if the desert is reclaiming a loan it never agreed to. You reach what might have been a plaza. The ground feels almost level, dotted with stubs of pillars just enough to whisper architecture, before slipping back into silence. Picture this space on a market day. Piles of dates sweet enough to make your dentist weep.
Leather water skins darkened by handling.
Baskets of millets so neatly arranged you'd want to Instagram them if only you had Wi-Fi and 1,000. Years closing, parenthesis. Above you, the sky is a vault of ink, pricked with more stars than you can count without caffeine. Back then, those same constellations guided caravans like celestial road signs. And now, they look down on a plaza that hasn't heard human chatter in centuries? There's a tenderness to that thought, isn't there? Like the universe keeps watching, even when the stage is emptied and the curtains are dust. You wander toward a low-rise, maybe an old granary, or someone's idea of prime real estate. Inside, the shadows stretch like cats licking their paws. You crouch, half expecting to find something: a shard, a coin, a secret message saying, "Hey, thanks for dropping by," but there's nothing. Just sand, patient and smug. It's like the desert knows you're here for answers and decides to play hard to get. You stand and look out across the horizon. It ripples like molten bronze under the moon, an endless ocean that drinks cities without a trace. For a second, you wonder, what if more are hiding out there, just a few dunes away, lying low like fugitives? The idea makes your pulse quicken, not that you're about to grab a shovel and start digging. You're barely surviving the night breeze without your hoodie. And yet something in you stirs, because these ruins, however broken, feel stubborn. They refuse to vanish completely, as if whispering, "We were here, we mattered, matters to you too." Even if the only witnesses now are you, the wind, and a couple of judgmental lizards. The thought lingers as you turn back, sand squeaking softly under your boots. You look over your shoulder one last time at the ghost of a plaza, glowing silver in the moonlight, and wonder how long before even this trace is gone. The dunes are patient, after all. They always win in the end. The desert rolls on, and you glide with it, though glide is generous when your calves are screaming like overworked backup dancers. The dunes rise and fall like frozen waves, sculpted by a wind that doesn't know the meaning of mercy. At first glance, it feels peaceful, almost soft. But don't be fooled. These dunes are predators, slow and relentless, creeping over anything foolish enough to stand still. You pause on a crest and look back. Behind you, the faint prints you left an hour ago are already blurring, erased grain by grain. That's the desert's big magic trick: memory loss. It swallows roads, villages, cities' entire chapters of human ambition in, till the page looks blank again. Somewhere under these hills might be the bones of a palace, its walls sighing under tons of sand. Imagine building your dream house only to have Mother Nature dump the world's largest sandbox on it. Historians still argue whether the Sahara is great. Erasers, these migrating dunes were the main culprits in wiping out settlements. Some point to evidence that rivers once ran here, carving lush valleys before shrugging and vanishing. Others suggest human stubbornness played its part. Plant too many crops, strip too many trees, and the land decides, nope, we're done. The debate is wide open, partly because the clues keep playing hide and seek under billions of tons of sand. Here's a weird tidbit. There's a known phenomenon where dunes can sing. Actual sound, like a low humming note that feels more sci-fi than geology. Picture yourself half asleep, then the hills around you start moaning like an ancient organ recital. Not creepy at all, right? Just a casual reminder that the desert has a sense of humor and better acoustics than your local jazz bar. You step down the slope. It gives way in a lazy slide, the grains whispering underfoot. Below, a ripple of moonlight turns the sand into a silver sea. You keep moving, though part of you wants to just lie down, watch the stars, and accept your new identity as a permanent dune accessory. But the air's cool now, and something ahead catches your eye, darker swell breaking the pale monotony. You reach it and realize it's not a dune, but a mound of rubble half swallowed by sand. A wall, perhaps, or the remains of a watchtower. Its stones crouched, like tired shoulders. You climb up, balancing like a cat on a shelf, and the view knocks the breath from your lungs. All around, the dunes stretch like an endless frozen ocean, crest after crest rolling to the horizon. And in that ocean, you imagine ship-scamel caravans sailing in slow motion, their bells tinkling, their shadows long against the rising sun. The stillness here is deceptive. These dunes, for all their hush, are always on the move, like commuters in the world's slowest rush hour. Geologists say they migrate at a few meters a year, which sounds harmless until you realize a century can bury a kingdom. It's the ultimate passive-aggressive land grab. The sand doesn't fight, doesn't roar, it just leans in and whispers, mine. You sit on the ruin and let the night wrap around you. Somewhere out there, archaeologists dig in heat that could melt logic, hoping for a shard of pottery, a wall outline, maybe a stubborn manuscript that defied both sun and sand. Their brushes sweep delicately, coaxing stories from grit, trying to piece together lives that ended without applause. Every grain they move is a small rebellion against the dune's tyranny, though the desert probably smirks and thinks, cute. Effort. You glance at the stars again, and they seem closer now, as if leaning in to listen. It's quiet enough that you hear your own breath, steady and slow, syncing with the rhythm of the shifting sands. And you wonder, are these dunes really silent witnesses, or are they storytellers, humming in a language we've forgotten how to hear? The thought settles over you like a soft blanket, warm and a little eerie. Somewhere far off, the wind stirs, a low sigh rolling across the hills. You stand brushing sand from your clothes, a futile exercise, but it makes you feel civilized. One last look at the ruin, half buried and stubborn, like a memory refusing to fade. Then you turn and keep walking, your path melting behind you as if the desert prefers its secrets unshared. The air feels cooler now, like the desert's finally exhaling after a long day of glaring heat. You keep moving across the hushed expanse, and ahead, a faint glow winks at you, a fire. Maybe? Your pulse quickens. After hours of sand and silence, even the suggestion of company feels like a gift. As you crest a low ridge, you spot them. A small encampment nestled in the lee of a dune, lanterns flickering against indigo tents. The smoke curls lazily, fragrant with something earthy and sweet probably. Tea, the scent alone could make you weep. You approach slowly, like a guest walking into a whisper. They see you coming, of course. These are desert people. Nothing escapes their radar. A figure steps forward, draped in layers of deep blue cloth, the kind that turns skin to mystery and eyes to poetry. His face is mostly hidden, but his gaze is steady, calm, like someone who's been waiting centuries for you to show up. He gestures to the fire without a word, and you accept, because really, what else would you do? You sit on a rug so worn it feels like memory under your hands. Someone pours tea from high above the glass, letting it froth and shimmer like green silk. It's sweet, sharp, and hot enough to scald your soul in the best possible way.
3.
Cups always 3. That's the rule. The first is bitter like life, the second strong like love, the third soft like death. You sip, and for a moment, you feel the weight of every caravan that's ever paused under this same indifferent sky. Here's the thing. while the cities crumbled and the trade routes shifted. These people, the nomads, the Tuareg, the Fulani, countless others, never vanished. They bent, adapted, moved like water, finding cracks in stone. Their lives are maps written on wind, songs carried in saddlebags, stories told by fires like this one. No marble palaces, no grand archives, yet somehow they kept the essence alive. You wonder if permanence was ever the point, or if survival graceful. Stubborn survival was the real legacy, historians still argue. Whether these nomads descended from the builders of the lost cities, or if they were always separate. Threads in the desert's tapestry? The debate smolders in journals, but here by the fire, it feels irrelevant. The truth, like the dunes, keeps shifting. And maybe that's fine. Quirky fact for you. Some Tuareg men veiled their faces, not the women. That flips the script you expected, doesn't it? The reason is partly practical. Sandstorms don't care about gender, but also symbolic. The blue dye from the indigo cloth often rubs off on their skin, giving them the nickname Blue Men of the Sahara. Imagine sweating so elegantly that you end up looking like a cosmic superhero. The conversation drifts like smoke. Someone hums a tune, low and hypnotic, a melody that feels older than the sand itself. You close your eyes and let it wrap around. It's not just music, it's a compass, a memory anchor. These songs map the desert better than any GPS ever will. Each note is a landmark, each rhythm a reminder. Here is where water hides. Here is where the wind can kill. And the food, they hand you a bowl of something warm and spiced, maybe couscous with a sauce that tastes like cinnamon. Earth and a little miracle. You eat slowly, savoring every bite, aware that this isn't just dinner. It's hospitality forged in a land where generosity is survival. Deny a stranger water here, and you both might not make it. Are empty, and the tea glasses drained, the fire settles into embers, glowing like tiny suns. Above you, the stars bloom in a sky so dark it feels infinite. You tilt your head back until your neck protests, tracing constellations older than every empire buried under these dunes. Somewhere up there, those same stars once guided merchants, hauling salt and scholars carrying knowledge that could light 1,000 lamps. You realize, with a little shiver, that you've become part of this ancient continuum, however briefly a traveler welcomed by the people who refuse to vanish. Their footprints may fade by morning, but their songs, their stories, those will outlast the shifting dunes. And maybe if you listen hard enough, they'll outlast you too. The fire pops softly, a lone spark spiraling into the night. You lie. Back on the rug, the sand cool beneath, the sky heavy with stars. Sleep teases the edges of your mind, but not yet. Not while the desert hums like a living thing, and the voices by the fire drift into lullabies you can't quite understand. But somehow they understand you. The night stretches endlessly, yet the silence feels almost alive, pulsing like a slow heartbeat beneath the stars. You rise at dawn, greeted by a sky that stains itself in shades of apricot and rose, the kind of colors you'd expect from a painter obsessed with tenderness. The camp is already stirring, figures moving like shadows, folding rugs, securing saddlebags. Their silhouettes crisp against the awakening horizon. You're handed a final cup of tea, steaming and sweet, the last thread tying you to this fleeting haven. You drink slowly, aware of the ritual weight. Beginnings and endings always taste like tea in this part of the world. One of the nomads presses a small token into your hand, a bead, worn smooth, maybe carved centuries ago. It's not much, but you know it hums with history. The desert doesn't give souvenirs lightly. Then they vanish. No grand farewells, no sentimental speeches, just a shimmer of indigo slipping into the dunes until the horizon swallows them. Whole, it hits you. This is how entire cities disappeared. Not with explosions, not with drama, but with quiet departures repeated 1,000 times. Civilization here isn't a fortress of stone. It's a tent that folds when the wind insists. You shoulder your pack and walk on. Ahead, jagged silhouettes puncture the sand ruins, perhaps though from a distance they could just as easily be mirages. The Sahara loves to play tricks on you. dangling promises of permanence in a landscape devoted to erasure. Every step closer peels away the shimmer until stone edges sharpen against the sun. Yes, real walls, real arches, skeleton. Of something once alive, you slip through what was once a gate, its frame worn down like an old tooth. Inside, silence sprawls like royalty. You imagine it bustling centuries out, markets humming, camels groaning under salt blocks, scholars quoting lines from the Quran with voices smooth as honey. The ground crunches underfoot, layers of sand and broken pottery shards, each one. A whisper from someone who thought this place eternal. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. Mainstream fact for you, this could be the ghost of Garama, capital of the Garamantes. They ruled here when Rome was still busy sculpting marble abs and debating politics in togas. These people carved channels under the desert fogras, underground irrigation systems pulling life out of stone like magicians. Imagine that. Aqueducts beneath a sea of sand, a silent network feeding date palms and olive groves. Historians call it hydraulic engineering. You call it pure, stubborn genius. And yet it ended. Maybe the water dried up. Maybe trade routes shifted. Maybe climate change swung its ruthless hammer centuries before we coined the phrase. Historians still argue whether it was gradual decline or one catastrophic collapse that pushed the Garamantes into oblivion. Whatever the cause, their ghost city now lounges under the sun like an old lion, regal, even in ruin. You trace your fingers along a fragment of wall, stone rough and warm, and you feel something electric-like the past humming under your skin. You imagine voices echoing here, merchants haggling, children laughing, someone shouting for fresh figs. Wind tugs at your sleeve as if to say, don't get too comfortable. Nothing here lasts. Quirky tidbit for the road. Some ancient Saharan markets supposedly had oath stones where deals were sealed not with ink, but with rituals involving spitting, sand, and occasionally a lizard. Because why not? Contracts blow away in the wind. You improvise. You can almost picture two traders glaring at each other over a squirming reptile like you first. You wander deeper, past tumbled walls that look like broken teeth against the blue sky. A collapsed arch frames the horizon like a doorway into another century. Beyond it, the dunes roll on, vast and indifferent, like an audience that forgot to clap. You wonder how many more skeletons lie buried out there, how many names erased, how many dreams swallowed whole. Some say there are dozens, others whisper hundreds. The Sahara guards its secrets like a jealous lover. As the sun climbs higher, heat begins to gnaw at you. Silence thickens, heavy as velvet, broken only by the wind rasping through hollow. Doorways. You pause in what might have been a market square, kneel, and sift the sand through your fingers. Tiny flecks of pottery glint, like dying stars. Once, this ground pulsed with commerce and chatter. Now it's just you, kneeling like a pilgrim at the altar of impermanence. And yet, standing there, you feel oddly calm. Maybe because the ruins don't mourn themselves. They just exist patient, sunlit bones humming with a history that doesn't need your pity. You realize the desert isn't cruel, it's honest. Nothing lasts. Not cities, not empires, not even you. So make it beautiful while it breathes. The wind sighs, scattering sand like confetti. And for a heartbeat, it almost sounds like applause. You linger among the ruins longer than you planned. Time seems to melt here, pooling in the shadows of broken walls. The desert doesn't rush you, it has no deadlines. Its only rule is patience. You start to notice the small things, the way. Sunlight glints off a fragment of glazed tile, the faint curve of a collapsed arch hinting at former grandeur. The ghostly grooves of old wagon tracks etched into stone, like wrinkles on an ancient face. You imagine the last day this city truly lived. Merchants shouting prices, camels grumbling. Maybe a storyteller spinning tales about distant lands where rain falls every afternoon. And then nothing. The silence crept in like a patient thief, one grain of sand at a time. People left slowly, perhaps reluctantly carrying what they could, leaving the rest to the wind. It's strange, isn't it? For all our cleverness, all our inventions, It only takes a stubborn shift in climate to turn kings into ghosts. Mainstream fact for you. When trans-Saharan trade flourished, these markets pulsed with life. Gold flowed north, salt moved south, and ivory slipped quietly through like contraband moonlight. Some historians even argue that the riches of these lost cities helped bankroll European cathedrals centuries later. Think about that. Your desert silence might have paid for stained glass in Paris. Quirky tidbit. There's a local legend that in one of these cities, a trader once brought a snowball, packed in wool, all the way from the Atlas Mountains, just to impress a rival merchant. Was it true? Historians still argue whether this was a poetic exaggeration or the earliest recorded case of flexing. Either way, the mental image is fantastic. A sweating camel hauling a tiny lump of winter through a furnace of sand like the world's saddest ice cream delivery. You keep moving. Tracing alleyways that lead nowhere, stepping over stones polished smooth by centuries of vanishing footsteps. The air vibrates with heat, making the ruins shimmer as if they're undecided about existing. You wonder if these places want to be found at all, or if every uncovered wall is just another wound reopened. Maybe the Sahara prefers its secrets. Buried eventually, you climb a low rise and turn back for one last look. The city sprawls beneath you like a faded tattoo, its lines blurred but still telling a story if you know how to read it. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel something. Heavy and sweet. Awe, laced with humility. Because this isn't just about lost markets or forgotten walls. It's about the quiet truth humming under every empire. Every skyscraper, everything we call permanent, nothing holds forever. Not kingdoms, not currencies, not even names carved in stone. The wind picks up, as if to underscore the point, and a spray of sand skitters across your boots. You smile. Because the desert always gets the last word, you turn toward the horizon. The dunes rippling like an amber ocean under a molten sky. Each step feels softer now, almost weightless, as though the Sahara has accepted you not as conqueror, not as savior, but as a fleeting guest, and that's all you ever were. The sun dips low, painting everything in gold so rich it looks like the world's been lacquered. Shadows stretch, long and languid, and the ruins fade into silhouettes, quiet guardians of a time that slipped away. Without fanfare, you walk until even those silhouettes dissolve into dusk, till the stars unpin themselves and scatter like spilled salt across black velvet. And there it is, the eternal paradox. A land so empty, yet so full of memory, a silence so deep it roars louder than any city, and you, a tiny traveler floating through it like dust. You could almost laugh if your throat weren't so dry now, as the desert exhales its last heat, and the night folds you in like a patient mother. Let your breath slow. Feel the weight lift, grain by grain. The world hums softer out here, softer than your own heartbeat, softer than thought. You are safe. You are still. The dunes settle. Ruins dream, and so should you. Settle deeper into whatever you're resting on, pillow, blanket, or just the thought of comfort curling around you. The desert, with all its riddles and ruins, is far behind now. There are no caravans to follow, no lost gates to trace with your fingertips. Only quiet, deep and slow, like water pooling in a hidden spring. Breathe in gently. Let the breath spread like ripples across a calm lake. Exhale even softer, as though you're blowing dust off an ancient map you no longer need. There's nothing left to find. Everything important, warmth, safety, stillness is already here with you. Imagine the last glow of sunset melting into violet, the first stars pricking through like shy lanterns. A cool breeze drifts across the dunes, carrying scents of date palms and distant fires. Brushes against your skin like a whispered promise. Rest now. Desert will keep watch. Your eyelids grow heavier, like doors swinging shut in a long abandoned city. No rush, no noise, just silence folding over silence, until even thought becomes too much trouble. If any stray images remain, ruined gates, silent markets, footprints that lead nowhere, let them fade into soft outlines, then into nothing. The Sahara has always been good at teaching things to vanish gently. Breathe once more, deep and slow. Feel the weight of the day crumble like ancient stone, grain by grain, until you are light as the wind itself, floating, drifting, gone. Sleep well, traveler. You've wandered far enough.